He locked me in the room with a man 3 times my size. "Just stay quiet," my father whispered before closing the door. For 5 years, my body was currency in the hands of those who were supposed to protect me. Hello, my dear friends. What a joy to be here with you today. My name is Flora Mae Johnson, and I'm 72 blessed years old, thank God. Today, I live here in Oak Ridge, a small town in rural Kentucky, with a heart as big as the people who live here. You can't imagine how wonderful it is to live in a place where everyone knows and helps each other. After my morning coffee, I sit in my mother's old rocking chair, may she rest in peace, and start knitting. I've made so many scarves, blankets, and beanies that I've lost count. I started knitting when I was about 60, you know? It was my granddaughter Juliana who taught me. Imagine that, the granddaughter teaching the grandmother. Life takes such turns, doesn't it? She came to my house one day with needles and colorful yarn. "Grandma, I'm going to teach you something that will help calm your nerves," she said. At first, my trembling hands could barely hold the needles properly. But with her patience and my stubbornness, I eventually got the hang of it. And today, those needles and yarn are my faithful companions. When my fingers get tired from knitting, I go to the kitchen to prepare something. Just today, I made a cornbread with cheddar cheese that's simply delicious. The recipe came from my grandmother, who was part Cherokee. Back then, we didn't have all these modern conveniences. We cooked everything on a wood stove with patience and care. My house is simple, but it's my little haven of peace. I have a small porch where I've placed some chairs and a little table. That's where I receive my neighbors for a chat and coffee. Ms. Zuleika always brings her homemade cookies, and Jasira tells us the town news. That's how we live, one day after another, sharing joys and sorrows. In the late afternoons, when the sun is setting, my grandchildren come home from school. I have 3, Juliana, who's 15, Gabriel, who's 12, and little Mariana, who's 8 years old. They fill the house with life, with their laughter and games. I help with their homework, tell stories about the old days, and they teach me how to use modern technology. Gabriel was the one who taught me how to record these videos to talk with you. Oh, and before I continue my story, I wanted to make a special request to you who are watching. If you like what you're hearing, please leave your like and subscribe to the Grandparents' Tales channel. It helps this grandma here continue telling her stories. And tell me in the comments, what town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take a little time from your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of affection. But today, I didn't come just to talk about my plants and my grandchildren. I came to tell a story that I kept hidden for many years, deep in my heart. A story of pain, but also of overcoming. Because, my dears, life wasn't always the bed of roses it is today. There was a time when I lived a nightmare in the hands of someone who should have protected me, my own father. I was born in Riverdale, near the Mississippi River, in rural Kentucky. It was a quiet little town where everyone knew each other and news traveled faster than the river waters. Our house was simple, with a dirt floor and thatch roof, but my mother, Irene, kept everything so tidy it looked like a palace. She was a strong woman, with rough hands from so much work, but with a smile that lit up the whole world. My father, Edward, worked as a fisherman and sold fish at the town market. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a laugh that made the walls tremble. But he had a look that changed like the weather. We were a big family. Besides me, the youngest, I had 4 older siblings. Gerald, the oldest, who from an early age helped Daddy with fishing. Then came Nancy, who had a special way with plants. Eugene, who was quiet and always had his head in books the teacher loaned. And Olivia, who was about 3 years older than me and was my companion for everything. Our house was in the most remote part of Riverdale, almost at the river's edge. It was a small house, but the yard was huge. We had mango trees, persimmon trees, blackberry bushes, and even some chickens that Mama raised. The ground was just dirt, and when it rained, it formed mud that we used to make little figurines. The walls were made of wattle and daub, that mixture of mud and straw that we ourselves helped prepare. Our kitchen had a wood stove that Mama lit early in the morning, and the smell of coffee being strained through those cloth filters filled the whole house. We didn't have a bathroom inside the house. It was a wooden outhouse at the back of the yard, and when it rained, it was so miserable to go out there. We bathed with well water that Daddy pulled up with a rope and bucket. In winter, it was that cold water that made your whole body shiver. But we didn't care. It was all very natural to us. My childhood, until I was 8, was like any rural child's at that time. I woke up with the rooster crowing, helped Mama sweep the yard and feed the chickens. Then I went to school, which was just a small room where Miss Dorothy taught all the children together, regardless of age. I still remember the smell of chalk and the yellowed primer we used to learn our first letters. After school, it was time to play. We invented all sorts of games. We had spinning tops, marbles, tag, hide and seek, and my favorite, which was jumping rope. Olivia always sang, "A man knocked on my door, and I opened it. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hand on the ground. Ladies and gentlemen, jump on one foot." And we jumped until we couldn't take any more. We also played house under the peach tree, where fallen leaves became our carpet and low branches our walls. My little friends were the neighbors' children. There was Ivy, who was my age, Jude, who was a little older and could make the best slingshots of any boy, and Zelda, who was the most spirited of all and always invented the most fun games. We ran barefoot down those dirt roads, fell, got scratched, but got up and continued to play as if nothing had happened. At night, after Daddy came back from fishing and Mama finished tidying up the kitchen, we would sit in front of the house to hear the stories that Grandma Dorothy told. They were stories of the boogeyman, the werewolf, Bigfoot, and the phantom hitchhiker, which she said protected the Kentucky forests. We listened to everything with wide eyes, with fear and fascination at the same time. On weekends, the whole family went to church. It was the only brick building in the area, all white with a cross on top that shone when the sun hit it. Mama wore her only good dress, navy blue with little white flowers, and arranged my hair with colored ribbons. After Mass, it was market day. Daddy sold the fish he had caught during the week, and Mama took advantage of buying what we needed: flour, beans, a little meat when possible. The Riverdale market was a feast for my child's eyes. It had everything: fruits, vegetables, jerky, molasses, crafts, herbs for homemade remedies, and even little wooden toys that we drooled over but couldn't always buy. The smell of spices mixed with that of fresh fish and ripe fruit. The vendors shouted announcing their products, and buyers haggled with gusto. It was during this time, around my 8th year, that things began to change. At first, they were small changes, so small that they were almost unnoticeable. Daddy began to come home later from fishing, sometimes smelling of moonshine. When he arrived like that, it was best to be very quiet, because any noise irritated him. Mama lowered her head and sent us to bed earlier on those days. Then the shouting began. My siblings and I would curl up under the blanket, listening to Daddy yelling at Mama for any reason. "The food is cold. The house is a mess. You're spending too much." His voice, which used to laugh and make the walls shake, now shook them in a different way. I remember one night in particular. The rain was falling heavily outside, and the sound of the drops on the thatch roof almost drowned out Mama's sobs. Almost, but not completely. She had a wet cloth on her face, and when she took it off, I saw a purple bruise under her eye. "It was an accident," she said. "I slipped and hit the door." But her eyes told a different story. Around that same time, my older siblings began to leave home one by one. First, Gerald, who found work in Louisville and only came back occasionally. Then Nancy, who married a boy from a neighboring town. Eugene went to study in the capital with the help of a teacher who saw potential in him. Only Olivia remained, who would soon find work as a maid in a family home in Riverdale itself. And that's when the world began to completely fall apart. One morning, we woke up with Mama feeling ill, with a fever that wouldn't break. The town doctor came to see and said it was typhoid, a disease that was spreading through the region because of contaminated water. For 2 months, Mama fought against the disease. We, the children, took turns giving her medicine, changing the damp cloths on her forehead and making food that she could barely swallow. On a stormy night, like the one when I first saw the bruise on her face, Mama called Olivia and me to her bedside. With a weak voice, almost a whisper, she said, "Take care of each other, be strong, and remember that a mother's love never ends, even when the mother is no longer here." That dawn, while the wind howled outside, Mama Irene left this world, leaving a void that would never be filled. And so, at 10 years old, I found myself without the warm, protective embrace of my mother, having to face a world that, as I would soon discover, could be much more frightening than the werewolf stories that Grandma Dorothy told. After Mama passed, the house felt different. The smell of fresh coffee in the morning was replaced by a heavy silence. The flowers in the garden that she had cared for so much began to wilt. It was as if the soul of our little house had departed with her. For a few weeks, Daddy was quieter. He didn't yell, didn't drink. He just stared into nothingness with those empty eyes. Olivia, at 13, tried to play the role of woman of the house, but she was still a child too. I tried to help as much as I could, washing pots, sweeping the floor, feeding the chickens. But nothing was like before. It was on a market Saturday that I noticed the first change. Daddy came home earlier than usual, carrying a bag of food, something he never did before. "I found a way for us to improve our lives," he said, placing on the table a piece of meat that we hadn't seen in a long time. Olivia and I looked at each other, not really understanding. That same day, after dinner, he called Olivia for a private conversation. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to clean the pots, but straining my ear to try to hear. I only caught a few isolated words. Respectable family, opportunity, maid, good salary. When Olivia returned, her eyes were teary, but she had a weak smile on her lips. "I'm going to work in Colonel Matthews' house," she told me later, when we were lying on our straw mattress, sharing the same patched blanket. "Daddy said it's a chance to learn to be a proper young lady and still earn a little money to help at home." 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, I saw my sister leaving with a small bundle of clothes under her arm. Daddy accompanied her to the house of the so-called Colonel, which was in the rich part of Riverdale, where the houses had glass windows and iron gates. I ran after them part of the way, but Daddy sent me back home. I only had time to hug Olivia and promise that I would visit her every Sunday. And so I was left alone with Daddy in that house that grew larger and more silent each day. At first, he still went fishing every day, and I took care of the house as I had learned from Mama. But soon the routine changed. Daddy began to miss fishing days, saying he was tired or that the weather wasn't good. He went more and more to Mr. Theodore's tavern, where men gathered to drink moonshine and play cards. When he returned, already at nightfall, he would stagger along the path and shout for hot food. If there wasn't any, it was my fault. "You useless girl, you can't even do that," he would rage, banging his hand on the table. I would tremble like a green twig, but I didn't cry in front of him. I cried afterward, hidden under the blanket, hugging the pillow that still held a little of Mama's scent. The following Sunday, as promised, I went to visit Olivia. But when I reached the big house of Colonel Matthews, his wife, Mrs. Norma, a thin lady with an upturned nose, told me that Olivia was too busy to receive visitors. "Come back another day," she said, closing the gate in my face. I returned the next Sunday, and the next, always receiving the same answer. Until one day, Mrs. Norma didn't even open the gate. She just shouted from inside the house, "I already told you she can't receive visitors. Don't come back." 3 months passed without news of my sister. 3 months in which the situation at home only worsened. The money from fishing, which was already little, became increasingly rare. The bills began to pile up. The rice ran out, then the beans. I spent days eating only cornmeal with a little salt. It was on one of these nights, when my stomach was rumbling so loudly I couldn't sleep, that I heard the front door open. It was quite late, and I thought it was Daddy coming back from the tavern. But I heard different voices, men I didn't know. I stayed very still in my bed, my heart beating fast. "So this is where you live, Edward?" asked a deep voice. "Humble place, huh?" "It's what I can afford," replied Daddy with that slurred voice he had when he was drunk. "But come in, come in." The men entered the living room, which was separated from the bedroom only by an old curtain. There were 3, besides my father. Through the small hole in the curtain, I could see that they all had glasses in their hands. "And where is this daughter you talk so much about?" asked another man, shorter and pot-bellied. "I'm curious to meet her." "Flora, come here," shouted Daddy. My entire body froze. I didn't want to leave that bed, but I knew it was worse to disobey. I put on my only decent dress, which was already too short, and came out from behind the curtain. 4 pairs of eyes looked me up and down, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Is this her?" asked the third man, older than the others, with gray hair at his temples. "But she's just a child." "She'll be 11 next month," Daddy answered, putting his hand firmly on my shoulder. "But she already knows how to cook, wash, iron, does all the housework." It was then that I understood what was happening. Like Olivia, I was also being offered to work as a maid. I felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief to leave that house that only brought sad memories now. Fear of not knowing what awaited me. "Well," said the pot-bellied man, scratching his chin, "my wife has been needing help with the little ones. How much are you asking, Edward?" It was as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over me. Daddy wasn't just arranging a job for me. He was selling me. "For you, who is my friend, I'll do it for $300. It's a bargain, considering that she will work forever, and you don't need to pay a salary, just food and a place to sleep." The men began to discuss prices, as if I were a chicken at the market. I felt tears burning in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I thought of Olivia, of what might have happened to her. Had she also been sold like this? Or was she really working as a maid, receiving a salary as Daddy had said? $500 and she comes with me today, said the older man, pulling out a wad of money from his pocket. "My farm in Newland needs another hand in the kitchen." "Deal," replied Daddy, taking the money eagerly. "Go pack your things, girl. You're going with Colonel Jacobs now." With shaky legs, I went back to the bedroom and gathered what little I had. 2 changes of clothes, a broken comb, and a small image of the Virgin Mary that Mama had given me. I put everything in a burlap sack and returned to the living room. "Ready? You can take her," said Daddy, already putting the money in his pants pocket. Not a hug, not a word of affection. Just a light push on the back toward the door. Colonel Jacobs led me to a cart that was waiting outside. "Get up there in the back," he ordered, pointing to the rear part where there were sacks of flour and other provisions. I obeyed in silence, sitting on one of the sacks, hugging my little bundle to my chest. As the cart moved away, I looked back one last time. Daddy was at the door, counting the money by the light of the lamp. He didn't look at me, didn't wave, didn't show any sign that he was sending away his last daughter. At that moment, I knew I was alone in the world. The journey to Newland lasted all night. Huddled among the sacks, swaying with the jolts of the cart on the dirt roads, I tried not to think about what awaited me. I tried to remember the stories that Grandma Dorothy told, the games with Olivia, Mama's smile. But the fear was stronger than the memories. When we arrived, dawn was breaking. Colonel Jacobs's farm was enormous, with a 2-story main house, white with blue windows, and several smaller buildings scattered around. I was taken directly to the kitchen, where a black woman with gray hair and calloused hands received me with a pitying look. "This is Flora," said the colonel. "Teach her the work, Delia, and remember that I don't want to see anyone idle around here." Delia nodded and waited for him to leave before approaching me. "How old are you, child?" she asked, with a surprisingly gentle voice. "I'm going to be 11, I answered, still hugging my little bundle as if it could protect me. She sighed deeply. "Oh, my lord." Another child. Her eyes met mine, and I saw in them a mixture of sadness and determination. "Listen carefully, child. Things aren't easy here on Colonel Jacobs's farm, but I'll do my best to protect you. Just do what I tell you, and don't answer back when the masters speak to you. Understand?" I nodded, feeling a little bit of hope for the first time since I had entered that cart. At least there was someone here who seemed to care. But that hope didn't last long. The next morning, I discovered what it really meant to be a servant on Colonel Jacobs' farm. The sun hadn't yet risen when Delia woke me that first morning on the farm. She shook me gently, put her finger to her lips, asking for silence, and pointed to a faded dress that she had left at the foot of the cot where I slept. "Put that on and come with me," she whispered. The dress was too big, but I tied the waist with a piece of rope and followed Delia to the kitchen. It was a large room with a huge wood stove, a long, dark wooden table in the center, and shelves full of pans of all sizes. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and burning wood reminded me of home, and for a moment I felt a lump in my throat. "Here," said Delia, handing me a heavy mortar and pestle. "Grind these coffee beans while I prepare the master's breakfast." I sat on a low stool and began to work. The mortar was heavy for my skinny arms, and soon my hands began to burn. But I continued, watching Delia move around the kitchen with the agility of someone who knows every corner. She kneaded the bread dough, cut fruit, beat eggs, and still found time to give me encouraging glances. When the sun finally appeared, the kitchen table was already set for the farm workers, and a tray with the master's breakfast waited to be taken to the big house. Delia gave me a piece of bread and a cup of coffee with milk. "Eat quickly," she said. "Afterward, you have to wash all the dishes." I had barely finished eating when the kitchen door opened and a tall woman entered, with blonde hair tied in a tight bun. It was Mrs. Eulalia, Colonel Jacobs's wife. Her blue eyes examined me up and down coldly. "So you're the new servant," she said, with an accent that revealed her foreign origin. "Delia, after she finishes here, send her to the big house. I want to see if she's good for anything beyond the kitchen." After she left, Delia approached me. "Be careful with Mrs. Eulalia," she whispered. "She has no patience with anyone, much less with children." When I finished washing the mountain of dishes, with my hands wrinkled from so much time in the water, Delia gave me instructions on how to get to the big house. "Don't look directly at the masters, don't speak unless they ask you something, and don't touch anything without permission," she advised. The big house was a different world from the kitchen. The floor was colored tiles, the walls had wallpaper with flower designs, and the furniture was carved wood that shone as if it had just been polished. I found Mrs. Eulalia in the living room, sitting in an embroidered armchair, leafing through a magazine. "Ah, finally," she said, closing the magazine. "Come here." I approached, keeping my eyes lowered as Delia had taught me. "Look at me," she ordered. When I raised my gaze, she held my chin with thin, cold fingers. At least you look clean. Can you read?" "A little, ma'am," I replied, remembering the lessons from Teacher Dorothy. "Good. You're going to clean the library. Each book must be taken from the shelf, dusted, and put back exactly in the same place." "Understood?" I spent the entire day in the library, going up and down on a wooden ladder, taking dusty books from the high shelves. Many had titles in languages I didn't know, with leather covers that smelled of mold and time. My arms ached, my stomach growled with hunger, but I didn't dare to stop, even for a minute. When I finally finished, it was almost night. I returned to the kitchen exhausted, hoping to be able to eat something. Delia served me a plate of beans with cornbread and a small piece of jerky. "How was it there?" she asked, while I devoured the food. "Tiring," I replied. "But I think the lady was satisfied." Delia shook her head. "Don't delude yourself, child. No one is ever satisfied here." And she was right. In the days that followed, I realized that no matter how hard I tried, there was always something wrong. If I washed the floor, it wasn't shining enough. If I made the beds, the sheets weren't perfectly stretched. If I helped in the kitchen, I was too slow or too clumsy. The tasks were endless. I woke up before the sun to help with breakfast, then cleaned the big house, washed clothes, starched sheets, polished pots, weeded the garden, fed the chickens, and any other service that needed to be done. At night, I fell onto the kitchen cot, so tired that I could barely think. But the worst wasn't the work itself, it was the treatment. For the masters, I was invisible until I did something wrong. Then, suddenly, I existed, but only to receive shouts and, sometimes, even slaps on the hands or ear pulls. Colonel Jacobs rarely appeared in the kitchen, but when he did, his small, dark eyes followed me around the room, making me uncomfortable. He was a large man with broad shoulders and thick hands, with a voice that made the walls tremble when he got angry. It was he who gave me my first beating, 2 weeks after my arrival. I was carrying a tray with dinner to the dining room when I tripped on the carpet and dropped a bowl of rice. The sound of the porcelain breaking was followed by a deadly silence. "You clumsy girl!" roared the colonel, rising from the table. "Do you know how much that porcelain costs?" Before I could answer, he grabbed a thin rod that hung on the wall. I had never understood what it was for until that moment. The blows on my legs and back burned like fire. But I learned that day not to cry in front of the masters. The tears only made them more irritated. Later, in the kitchen, Delia put an herbal remedy on the red marks that the rod had left. "You need to be more careful," she said, but her voice was gentle. "He has no mercy on anyone." As the months passed, I learned to move around the house like a shadow, to anticipate what the masters wanted even before they asked, to disappear when the colonel was in a bad mood. Delia became my only friend, the only person who treated me like a human being. It was she who told me about the other children who had passed through there. "Some run away," she said one night, while we had our last meal of the day. "But most have nowhere to go. And those who run away, when they are caught." She didn't complete the sentence, but the look she gave me said everything. One night, almost a year after my arrival, Delia called me to a dark corner of the kitchen. "I have something to tell you," she whispered, "but you need to swear that you won't say anything." I promised to keep the secret, and she continued. "Your sister, Olivia. She works in Colonel Matthew's house, who is Colonel Jacobs's brother." My heart raced. "You saw her? Is she okay?" Delia bit her lip. "I saw when I went to deliver a package there. She's alive, but I can't say she's well. That house is not a good place for a young girl." I wanted to ask more, beg her to take me there, but Delia put a finger on my lips. "We can't do anything now, but one day, who knows?" The hope of one day seeing Olivia again was like a small flame that kept me alive. On the hardest days, when the work seemed endless, or when the shouting and beatings became unbearable, I clung to this hope. But the reality of the farm remained harsh and relentless. Over time, my fingers became calloused from so much scrubbing, my hands chapped from so much time in water with lye. My body, which was that of a child when I arrived, began to change, and that brought new dangers. I realized that Colonel Jacobs's gaze upon me was different. It was no longer just the irritated look of the master to the clumsy maid. It was something more, something that made me want to hide when he was nearby. Delia also noticed. "Don't be alone with him," she warned me once, after catching the master observing me while I swept the porch. "And if he calls you to go to his office at night, say you're sick, that you have a fever, anything." I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I felt it was something serious. Fear became my constant companion. Fear of the colonel, fear of Mrs. Eulalia, fear of never seeing Olivia again, fear of spending the rest of my life on that farm. Time passed slowly, marked by the seasons. Harvest time, when the work doubled. The rainy season, when the leaks in the kitchen roof didn't let us sleep. The festive season, when the house filled with guests and we had to work day and night to keep up with everything. In one of these parties, a little before my 12th birthday, something happened that would change everything. The farm was full of colonels and their wives, all dressed in their best clothes. I and two other girls who had been brought recently, Zadie and Hortense, served drinks and appetizers, trying to be invisible as we had been taught. That's when I saw a familiar face among the guests. It was Colonel Matthews, the same one who had taken Olivia. My heart raced. If he was there, could it be? And then I saw her. Entering the hall right behind him, carrying a tray of sweets, was Olivia. But she was no longer the girl I remembered. At 15, she looked much older. Her face had lost the softness of childhood. Her eyes seemed opaque, lifeless. When our gazes crossed, I saw a flash of recognition, followed by an almost imperceptible gesture. A small shake of the head, as if to say, "Don't show that you know me." I obeyed, continuing my work as if nothing had happened. But inside, my heart was beating so hard I thought everyone could hear it. My sister was alive. She was there, just a few yards away from me. Later, when everyone was busy with dinner, I managed to bump into her in the hallway. "Meet me on the back porch after everyone is asleep," I quickly whispered, before continuing on my way as if nothing had happened. That night, as I waited for everyone to retire, I made plans. Maybe we could run away together, find our older siblings, start a life far from there. The simple idea of being with Olivia again gave me a courage I didn't know I had. Little did I know that this reunion, so longed for, would change my destiny in ways I could never have imagined. The house finally fell silent around midnight. The guests, intoxicated by wine and abundant food, retired to their rooms. The masters, tired of so much socializing, also withdrew. In the kitchen, Delia and the other maids finished putting away the last plates and pans. "I'm going to get some air outside," I whispered to Delia. "I can't sleep in this heat." She gave me a suspicious look, but nodded. "Don't be long, and watch out for the dogs." With my heart beating fast, I walked through the shadows to the back porch. The full moon illuminated the yard, projecting long shadows of the trees onto the packed dirt ground. I waited, huddled in a dark corner, counting the seconds and fearing that Olivia wouldn't be able to come. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard light footsteps approaching. A slender figure appeared on the porch, looking all around before whispering, "Flora, are you there?" I came out of the shadows, and in an instant, we were hugging. Olivia's body was so thin that I could feel her bones through the thin dress. She smelled of expensive perfume, a scent that didn't match the sister I knew. "Olivia, I thought I'd never see you again," I said, with a voice choked by tears I was trying to hold back. She moved away a little, holding my shoulders. In the moonlight, I could see her face more clearly. There was something different about her, besides the thinness and the older appearance. Her eyes, once so full of life, now seemed distant, as if part of her was somewhere else. "We don't have much time," she said, nervously looking over her shoulder. "If they discover we're talking—" "What happened to you?" I asked, unable to contain the question that had been consuming me. "Why did I never see you again? Why didn't they let me visit you?" Olivia lowered her gaze. "Flora, things aren't as Daddy said they would be. I'm not a maid, She hesitated, searching for the words. "I'm Colonel Matthews's property, just as you are Colonel Jacob's." Even at almost 12 years old, I understood what she meant. Delia's warnings, Colonel Jacob's glances, everything was beginning to make a terrible sense. "At first, it was just housework," Olivia continued, her voice almost a whisper. "But then, when I turned 13, her voice faltered and she couldn't continue. We remained silent for a moment, just holding each other's hands, as we used to do when we were little and afraid during storms. "We need to escape from here," I finally said, squeezing her hands. "Together. We can find Gerald or Nancy or—" "It's not that simple," Olivia interrupted, with a bitterness that didn't match her age. "I've already tried to run away once. They caught me before I reached the main road." She turned her face, and in the moonlight, I saw a thin scar that descended from her ear to her chin. It was the punishment for trying to be ungrateful, as he said. I felt a chill run down my spine. "But we can't stay here forever. Colonel Jacobs, he looks at me in a way—" "I know," said Olivia, and I saw tears glistening in her eyes. "That's why we need to be smart. We can't just run. We need a plan." I agreed, feeling a mixture of fear and determination growing inside me. "What kind of plan?" Olivia looked around once more, making sure we were alone. "There's a boy who works on Colonel Matthews' land, Amos. He's been good to me. Brings me food when I'm being punished, warns me when the colonel is in a bad mood. He said he knows people in Louisville who can help us." "Louisville? It's so far. But it's our best chance, a big city where we can disappear. And Gerald is there, remember? If we can reach him—" The mention of our oldest brother's name brought a pang of hope. Gerald had always been the strong one, the protector. If we were with him, we would be safe. "How would we do that?" I asked, already imagining the journey. "In a month, there will be the 4th of July celebration. The masters go to town, to the mayor's house. They only take a few servants. I've already offered to go. You need to do the same. If we're in town, it will be easier to escape." The plan seemed dangerous, almost impossible, but the alternative, staying on the farm, waiting for Colonel Jacobs to finally do to me what I feared, was unthinkable. "I'll try," I promised. "But what if they don't choose me to go?" "Then we'll try something else," Olivia replied, with a determination that reminded me of our mother. "But I won't leave you here, Flora. Not after finally finding you." We heard a noise coming from the house and quickly separated. "I need to go back," Olivia whispered. "If Mrs. Norma notices I left the room." We hugged one last time, tightly, as if we wanted to absorb each other's presence for the lonely days to come. "1 month," she murmured in my ear. "Hang in there for 1 more month." And then she was gone, disappearing into the shadows as silently as she had come. I stayed there for a few more minutes, feeling the night breeze dry the tears on my face. 1 month seemed both so close and so far away. I returned to the kitchen with light steps, praying that Delia had already gone to sleep. But she was there, sitting at the table, with a lit candle illuminating her tired face. "You found her, didn't you?" she asked without preamble. I thought about denying it, but her look said it would be useless. I nodded. "I was suspicious when I saw Matthew's girl. The way you looked at each other. There was something familiar." She sighed deeply. "You're planning to run away." It wasn't a question, but I confirmed it anyway. "We need to get out of here, Delia. You know what will happen if I stay." She extended her hand and touched my face gently. "I know, child. I know very well." Her eyes, usually so strong, seemed sad now. "I've seen this story so many times." "Are you going to tell them?" I asked, fearing the answer. Delia shook her head. "No, but I need you to understand the danger. If you're caught—" She didn't complete the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. The image of the scar on Olivia's face was vivid in my mind. "We have no choice," I said, with a conviction that surprised me. "I'd rather die trying than live like this." The words, so harsh coming from such a young girl, made Delia lower her head. When she raised it again, there was a resolution in her gaze. "I'm going to help you." In the following weeks, I lived in a constant state of nervousness. Every time Colonel Jacobs entered the kitchen, I trembled. Every time Mrs. Eulalia called me, I feared that somehow she had discovered our plans. To my despair, as the 4th of July celebration approached, Colonel Jacobs's looks became more insistent, more threatening. One night, he called me to his office to serve whiskey. While I filled his glass, I felt his hand touch my leg. I dropped the bottle in fright, and the whiskey spilled on his pants. The slap came quickly, taking me by surprise. "You clumsy girl!" he roared. "That's coming out of your hide." I cowered in the corner, waiting for the beating, but he just stood up, cleaning his wet pants. "Tomorrow," he said, with a voice that made my blood freeze. "Tomorrow night, you'll come back here and clean up this mess properly. Understood?" I ran out as soon as he dismissed me and ran to the kitchen, where I vomited all my dinner. Delia found me like that, trembling and pale. "What happened?" she asked, helping me to get up. Between sobs, I told her what had happened. "Tomorrow night," she repeated, her face somber. "That's not good, Flora. Not good at all." "What do I do?" I asked, desperate. Delia remained silent for a long moment, as if she were making a difficult decision. "You're going to run away. Tonight." "But what about Olivia? The plan?" "There's no more time for the plan," she cut in. "I'll help you get to town. From there, you can send a message to your sister, but you can't wait any longer." That night, while everyone slept, Delia handed me a small package. "It has food for 2 days and a little money I've saved. It's not much, but it should help." "Come with me," I begged, holding her calloused hands. "You don't deserve to stay here either." She smiled, a sad smile that carried the weight of many years of suffering. "My time for running has passed, child, but yours is just beginning." With tears in my eyes, I hugged this woman who had been more of a mother to me in the last years than anyone else. "I'll never forget you," I promised, "nor will I forget you. Now go, before someone wakes up." I left through the back door of the kitchen, carrying only Delia's small package and the hope of a better life. The night was dark, without a moon, which was good for hiding, but bad for finding the way. Following Delia's instructions, I kept the main road at a distance, walking through the brush, guided only by the stars and by the faith that God was watching over me. Every sound startled me, the hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves, the distant howl of a dog. I imagined the Colonel's men on my trail, the dogs sniffing my tracks. But I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, quietly repeating the names of my siblings like a mantra of hope. In the first light of morning, I reached the edge of a river, the same Mississippi River that bathed my hometown, now my escape route. There, exhausted and with bleeding feet, I had to make a decision: follow the bank, risking being seen, or try to cross, risking drowning. That's when I heard, in the distance, the barking of dogs. The barking grew louder every second. I looked at the river, its dark and turbulent waters, and felt fear paralyze me. I was never a good swimmer. The few times I had entered the Mississippi had been holding hands with Olivia or Gerald in shallow and calm stretches. This was different, deep, and with a strong current. "God, help me," I murmured as the barking approached. It was then that I spotted, a few yards downriver, a small canoe tied to a fallen trunk. It looked old and worn, but it was my only chance. I ran to it, ignoring the thorns that scratched my bare legs and the pebbles that hurt my bare feet. The canoe had a small leak, but it still floated. With trembling hands, I untied the rope that held it to the trunk. There was no paddle, just a piece of wood that might serve to direct the vessel. I got into the canoe, which rocked dangerously, threatening to capsize. I gripped the edges tightly, waiting for the rocking to pass, then used the piece of wood to push the canoe away from the shore. The current soon caught me, taking me downriver much faster than I had expected. I looked back and saw, on the shore I had just left, 3 men with dogs. One of them pointed in my direction, shouting something that the wind carried away. I saw one of the men enter the water as if he were going to try to swim to me, but another pulled him back, shouting and gesturing. The canoe spun and rocked in the current, and all I could do was cling to the edges and pray. Water entered through the small hole in the bottom, wetting my skirt. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden light on the river, making everything frighteningly visible. I can't say how long I stayed like that, at the mercy of the waters. Minutes or hours, it was impossible to tell. Fear and exhaustion began to take their toll, and I felt my eyes grow heavy, even in the dangerous situation. It was a violent jolt that woke me. The canoe had hit a rock and was now spinning out of control. In the distance, I heard the sound that riverside dwellers feared most, the roar of rapids. The Mississippi River, usually so gentle, had its treacherous stretches, and I was being dragged into one of them. "Help me, Holy Mother!" I shouted when the canoe began to pick up speed, descending through the rapids. Water sprayed in all directions, soaking me completely. A particularly strong impact almost threw me from the canoe. I held on with all my strength, my knuckles white with tension. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the rapids ended. The canoe slid into calmer waters, but the relief was short-lived. The impact on the rocks had widened the hole, and water was coming in with more force now. The canoe was beginning to sink. I looked around, desperate. The right bank seemed impassable, with steep bluffs and dense vegetation. But on the left, I saw a small sandy beach, followed by flatter ground. Using the piece of wood as an improvised paddle, I tried to direct the canoe there, but it was too heavy with the water coming in. When the water was already at knee-height inside the canoe, I made a decision. Pressing Delia's package against my chest, I jumped into the water. The shock of the cold water took my breath away, and for a moment I sank, swallowing river water. When I emerged, coughing and panting, the current was already carrying me away from the shore. I tried to swim, moving my arms as I had seen my siblings do, but the weight of the wet clothes and the package pulled me down. The shore seemed increasingly distant, and exhaustion began to win. I'm not going to die like this, I thought. Not after all I've been through. With one last effort, I released the package, sacrificing the food and money for the chance to live, and swam with all the strength I had left. The shore approached slowly, each stroke a small victory against death. When my feet finally touched the bottom, I could hardly believe it. I dragged myself to the small sandy beach, falling to my knees as soon as I left the water. I stayed there, coughing, trembling, and crying with relief, but I couldn't rest for long. The colonel's men could be anywhere, and I was alone, soaking wet, without food and without money. I got up with effort and began to walk, following the course of the river. The sun was already high in the sky when I spotted what appeared to be a small village. From a distance, I could see some straw houses, similar to the one from my childhood in Riverdale, and a larger construction that appeared to be a church or a warehouse. I hesitated. What if someone there worked for the colonel? What if they turned me in? Hunger and fatigue, however, spoke louder. I needed help, or I wouldn't survive much longer. I approached cautiously, trying to appear as unsuspicious as possible, which was difficult, considering my wet clothes and disheveled appearance. The first people I saw were some women hanging clothes on improvised lines. When they saw me, they stopped what they were doing, looking at me with astonishment. "Good morning," I said, with a trembling voice. "Excuse me, I got lost." One of the women, older than the others, approached me. She had gray hair tied in a bun and calloused hands like Delia's. "Lost is an understatement, child," she said, observing my soaked clothes and the scratches on my arms and legs. "You look like you escaped from hell." I didn't answer. I didn't know how much I could tell, how much was safe to reveal. "You're trembling," she continued. "Come, let's go inside. My name is Odette." I followed her to a simple but clean and organized little house. Inside, the smell of coffee and cornbread reminded me that I hadn't eaten anything since the night before. My stomach growled loudly, and Odette smiled. "Sit down," she said, pointing to a small wooden stool near the table. "I'll get something for you to eat and some dry clothes." While she moved around the house, I looked around, searching for signs of danger. I saw only the typical objects of a simple home: clay pots, straw baskets, some images of saints on the wall. Odette returned with a change of clothes and a piece of towel. "Change behind that screen," she said, pointing to a corner of the room. "Then come and eat." The clothes were big for me, probably from an older daughter, but they were clean and dry. When I returned, Odette had already placed on the table a plate with grits, a piece of jerky, and a mug of coffee with milk. I sat down and began to eat, trying not to show how hungry I was, but without much success. "Slowly," Odette advised, "or you'll get sick." When finally satiated, I looked at the woman who had welcomed me with such kindness. "Ma'am, would you help me get to Louisville?" Odette frowned. "Louisville? That's far from here. What does a girl like you want to do so far away?" I lowered my eyes. "My brother lives there. I need to find him." "And your parents?" I felt the tears return. "My mother died a long time ago. My father—" I couldn't continue. Odette seemed to understand. She placed her hand over mine. "You're running away, aren't you?" I nodded, without the courage to face her. "From Colonel Jacobs's farm." I raised my eyes, surprised. "How do you know?" "You're not the first girl to pass through here in this situation," she replied with a tired sigh. "This settlement, St. Anne's Landing, is between the Colonel's lands and the town of Newland. From time to time, some maid appears running away." "Ma'am, are you going to turn me in?" I asked, already calculating the distance to the door. "No, child. The Colonel has no power here. This village belongs to the church. Father Oliver doesn't let the Colonel's men enter here." I felt such great relief that I almost collapsed in the chair. "Thank God," I murmured. "But it won't be easy to get to Louisville," Odette continued. "It's more than a day's journey. You have to take the boat to Riverdale, then the bus." Upon hearing the name of my hometown, I felt a tightness in my heart. "I can't go back to Riverdale. My father could find me." Odette nodded, thoughtful. "I understand. But there is another way. You can take the boat from here to Maysville in Ohio, and from there the bus to Louisville. It's longer, but safer." The mention of money reminded me of the package lost in the river. "I don't have money to pay for the passage," I confessed, embarrassed. Odette was silent for a moment. Then she got up and went to a small chest in the corner of the room. She returned with a small cloth bag. "This should be enough for the passages and a little food," she said, handing me the bag, which clinked with coins. It was for my youngest daughter, Teresa's trousseau. But she was also taken to a farm. Never came back. I looked at the bag, then at Odette, without words to express my gratitude. "Just promise me one thing," she continued, holding my hands. "When you get to Louisville, seek help. Don't stay alone on the streets. And one day, when you can, help another girl who needs it, as I am helping you now." I promised, with tears in my eyes. "I'll look for my brother Gerald, and then I'll come back to get my sister Olivia. She's also trapped, on the farm of the Colonel's brother." Odette smiled, a sad smile that spoke of many losses. "You have courage, child. You'll need it." That same afternoon, Odette took me to the small port of the village. A fishing boat was preparing to depart downriver toward Maysville. "Emmett," Odette called, waving to the man who was arranging the nets on the boat. "I have a passenger for you." Emmett, a middle-aged man with skin weathered by sun and salt, looked at me curiously. "She's the niece of a friend of mine from Maysville," explained Odette, with a naturalness that surprised me. "She's going back home after visiting me." "The boat's not for passengers," Emmett grumbled, "but for you, Miss Odette, I'll make an exception." Odette hugged me tightly before I boarded the boat. "May God protect you, child." "Thank you for everything," I whispered. "I'll never forget you." The boat departed with the tide, leaving behind the small village that had been my refuge. I sat among the fishing nets, watching the banks of the river that had witnessed my desperate escape. The journey to Maysville took almost an entire day. Emmett didn't ask many questions. just offered me water and some dried fish. When we finally arrived, night was falling. The port of Maysville was much larger and busier than that of the village. Boats of all sizes docked and departed, loaded with merchandise and people. Emmett indicated where the bus station was. "There's a bus to Louisville tomorrow morning," he said. "Be careful out there, girl." I spent the night at the bus station, huddled in a corner, afraid to close my eyes and wake up back at the farm. When the first bus to Louisville was announced, I bought my ticket and boarded, still not believing that I was really escaping. The journey was long, on potholed roads that made the bus rock like a canoe in turbulent waters. But each mile took me further from Colonel Jacobs and closer to freedom, and perhaps to Gerald. Louisville appeared on the horizon like a mirage. I had never seen such a big city. Buildings that seemed to touch the sky, wide streets full of cars, people hurrying in all directions. When I got off the bus, I stood still, not knowing where to go. "Miss, are you lost?" asked a street boy who was selling candy near the bus station. "I'm looking for my brother," I replied. "Gerald Johnson. He works in construction." The boy made a face. "There are a ton of construction sites in Louisville. Do you know which one?" I didn't know. The last news we had received from Gerald had been years ago, when he sent word that he was working on a project in Louisville. Where exactly, no one knew. "Maybe at the market you'll find someone who knows him," suggested the boy. "There are people from all over there." I followed his indication and arrived at the Central Market of Louisville. It was an explosion of colors, sounds, and smells that dazed me. Stalls sold everything: fruits, vegetables, meats, clothes, crafts, herbs. Vendors shouted, announcing their products. Customers haggled. Children ran between the stalls. I spent the entire day walking around the market, asking all the vendors if they knew Gerald Johnson. Most just shook their heads negatively. Some asked questions that I couldn't answer. When the market began to close, I realized I was back to square one. With the money I had left, I bought a little food and found a cheap boarding house near the bus station. The owner, a lady named Hortense, looked at me suspiciously when I asked for a room. "Where are your parents, child?" "I'm looking for my brother," I replied, repeating the story I had rehearsed. "He works in construction here in Louisville. I came from the countryside to stay with him." Hortense didn't seem very convinced, but she accepted the money I offered her. "Just for one night," she said. "Tomorrow you need to find your brother." The room was small and simple, but clean. I lay on the bed, exhausted, but unable to sleep. Freedom, so dreamed of, now came with a new fear, that of not finding Gerald, of being alone in a big, unknown city. The next day, after a simple breakfast offered by Hortense, I went out again in search of my brother. This time, I followed the advice of one of the boarding house guests and went to the Construction Workers Union. The union building was simple, with a faded sign at the entrance. Inside, some men talked in low voices. I timidly approached the counter, where an older gentleman with glasses was organizing papers. "Excuse me," I said, with a trembling voice. "I'm looking for my brother, Gerald Johnson. He works in construction here in Louisville." The man looked at me over his glasses. "Gerald Johnson. I don't remember that name. But we have a record of the associates. Let me check." While he consulted a large record book, my heart beat quickly. It was my last hope. "We don't have any Gerald Johnson registered," the man finally said. "Are you sure he works in construction?" I felt as if the ground had disappeared from under my feet. "Yes, I'm sure. At least that's what he was doing when he left home." "And when was that?" "About 5 years ago." The man sighed. "A lot can change in 5 years, girl. He could be in another city, another state even." I left the union devastated. Without Gerald, without money, without a place to stay. What would I do now? I was walking aimlessly through the city when I heard someone call my name. I turned, startled, fearing to see one of the colonel's men, but who was coming toward me was a woman I didn't immediately recognize. "Flora? Is it really you?" When she got closer, I almost fell backward in surprise. It was Nancy, my older sister, who had left home to get married years ago. She looked different, her hair shorter, city clothes, but it was definitely her. "Nancy," I exclaimed, running to hug her. How did you find me?" She hugged me tight, then held my face in her hands, as if to confirm it was really me. "I didn't find you. It was chance, or God, I don't know. I'm here buying fabric to make curtains. But what are you doing here? And alone?" The tears which I had held back for so long finally came. Between sobs, I told Nancy everything. Mama's death, Daddy selling me to the colonel, the years on the farm, the escape by river, Odette's help, the search for Gerald. Nancy listened to everything in silence, her face changing from surprise to horror and finally to fury. When I finished, she hugged me again, so tightly I could hardly breathe. "My little sister," she said with a choked voice. "I went through so many difficulties that I didn't return to see you all. I thought you were well with Daddy. If I had known—" "It's not your fault," I said, wiping away the tears. "You didn't know." Nancy held my hands. "You're coming to live with me now, with Adam, my husband, and our children. We have a small house, but there's space for you." "But what about Olivia?" I asked. "She's still on Colonel Matthew's farm. I need to get her out of there." Nancy frowned. "One thing at a time, Flora. First you need to recover, get strong. Then we'll think about how to help Olivia." And so, in the space of one day, my life completely changed once again. From a lost and desperate girl, I came to have a home, a family. Nancy and Adam welcomed me with open arms into their home in a simple neighborhood of Louisville. In the months that followed, I adapted to city life. Nancy insisted that I go back to school, and I began to attend a school near home. At first, it was difficult. I was very behind compared to the other children my age. But I studied hard, determined to recover the lost time. At night, however, the nightmares came. I dreamed of Colonel Jacobs chasing me, of the river water swallowing me, of Olivia trapped and calling for help. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, and Nancy would come to calm me down. "It will pass," she would say, stroking my hair as Mama used to do. "With time, it will pass." But time passed, and the concern for Olivia only increased. I needed to save her, as I had saved myself. I needed to fulfill the promise we made that night, on the farm's porch. It was then that Eugene, our studious brother, appeared for a visit. He was finishing law school in Nashville and had come to spend his vacation in Louisville. When he learned of my story and Olivia's, his usually calm face transformed. "This is a crime, Flora. What they did to you, what they're doing to Olivia. It's slave labor, it's abuse, it's human trafficking. We need to report it." "Report it?" I asked, not understanding. "To whom? The police obey the colonels." "Not everywhere," replied Eugene. "There are federal authorities that investigate this type of crime, lawyers who aren't afraid of the colonels, journalists who can expose this." And so, with Eugene's help, we began to plan not only Olivia's rescue, but the end of the terror empire of Colonels Jacobs and Matthews. Today, when I look out the window of my little house in Oak Ridge and see the sun rising, I thank God for each day. Life has taught me that, even in the darkest nights, dawn always comes. The complaint that Eugene made against the colonels took time to take effect. They had powerful friends. But eventually, justice arrived. I had to relive everything in court, face Colonel Jacobs's gaze. But I wasn't alone. Nancy, Adam, and Eugene remained by my side. The hardest part was Olivia's rescue. When we got the court order to get her, we discovered she was no longer on the farm. She had been sold again, and no one knew, or pretended not to know, where to. They were anguishing months. Authorities searched farms in several states. We placed ads in newspapers, distributed photos, visited hospitals and even prisons. When we finally found her on a remote farm in Indiana, she was unrecognizable. Thin, with a lost gaze, her body marked by scars. Olivia had been sold several times, passing from one colonel to another like merchandise. Recovery was slow. She spent years in treatment, dealing with the traumas. There were days when I thought we would never again see the cheerful Olivia I knew in childhood. But human beings have an incredible capacity for healing when they receive love. Over time, Olivia found her way. She moved to a convent in Nashville where the nuns welcomed her. There, she found peace working in the garden. Today, at 75, she still lives there, serene in her simplicity. As for me, I finished my studies and went to college for social work. I wanted to help other girls who, like me and Olivia, had been victims of exploitation. I worked for more than 30 years at the Louisville Department of Social Services, dealing with cases of children at risk. Each child I managed to save was a way to heal my own wounds. I saw terrible things, situations that reminded me very much of what I had experienced. But I also saw miracles happen when people came together to protect the most vulnerable. It was through my work that I met Aaron, a detective specialized in crimes against children. We met during an operation to rescue girls from an exploitation network, and something connected us immediately. We got married when I was 32 years old, late by the standards of the time, but it was the time I needed to feel ready. Aaron taught me that not all men are like my father or Colonel Jacobs, that there is genuine kindness in this world. We had 2 children, Michael, now a doctor in Boston, and Chloe, who works with human rights in Washington. They are my greatest pride, along with my 3 grandchildren, Juliana, Gabriel, and little Mariana. When we retired, Aaron and I decided to leave Louisville and move to Oak Ridge. We wanted tranquility, proximity to nature, a place to heal the last wounds we still carried. We lived together for more than 40 years. Aaron left us 3 years ago, victim of a sudden heart attack. It was quick. He was in the yard when he fell. He didn't suffer, and for that I am grateful. Now I live alone, but I never feel lonely. My children visit me regularly. My grandchildren spend their vacations with me. My neighbors, Zuleika and Jasira, are companions for coffee and conversations. What fulfills me most today is being able to share my story. For years, I kept everything hidden, with shame and fear. But I realized that silence only protects the aggressors. Each time I tell what I experienced, I feel that I'm extending a hand to someone who might be going through something similar now. I volunteer at a support center for victims of violence here in Oak Ridge. The women and children who arrive there, with the same frightened eyes that I had, recognize me as an equal. When I say, I survived, you will survive too. They believe me, because they know I've been through what they're going through. When I look back at the frightened girl I once was, fleeing along the Mississippi River, I feel pain and pride at the same time. Pain for what I went through, for what Olivia and so many others suffered. Pride for having survived, for having used my experience to help others. Life didn't just give me scars, it gave me purpose. Each challenge I faced prepared me to extend a hand to those in need. Each tear I shed taught me to dry the tears of others with more compassion. If there's one thing I've learned, my dears, it's that our story doesn't end with our traumas. They are just chapters. Painful, yes, but they're not the entire book. What we do afterward, how we choose to continue living, that's what really matters. And so I carry on with life, one day at a time, grateful for each dawn, for each hug from my grandchildren, for each opportunity to transform pain into healing, not only for myself, but for others who cross my path. My dears, if you're going through difficult times now, I want you to know, you are not alone, and this is not the end of your story. When I escaped from the farm, I thought I would never be happy again, that the marks I carried, inside and out, would define me forever. I was wrong. We are much more than our worst experiences. What I learned in life, and want to share with you, is that our capacity to start over is much greater than we imagine. When everything seems lost, when the pain seems like it will swallow us, there is still a path ahead. I learned that each person we meet can change our trajectory. Delia showed me protection when I needed it most. Odette gave me hope when everything seemed impossible. Nancy offered me a home when I had nowhere to go. Never underestimate the power of extending a hand to someone who is suffering. You can literally save a life. I learned that justice and healing don't always come at the speed we want. It took years for the Colonels to be punished, even longer for Olivia to recover. But that doesn't mean we should give up. Persistence is a form of courage. I learned that our greatest power lies in transforming our pain into something meaningful. I used my experience to identify signs of abuse that others couldn't see, to reach children before the worst happened. Our wounds can become windows through which we see the suffering of others more clearly and compassionately. I learned that the body can be hurt, but the spirit has an indomitable strength. Even in the worst situations, there is a part of us that remains untouchable, that no aggressor can reach. It is this part that allows us to rebuild, to be reborn, to start over. If you're suffering now, don't be ashamed to ask for help. It's not weakness. It's the first step toward freedom. Look for authorities, protection organizations, trusted people. Don't believe it when they say you have no way out. There is always a path, even when we can't see it at the moment. And if you know someone who is living in the hell I once lived in, don't stay silent. Be the voice of those who can't yet speak. Be the hand extended to those who think they are alone. My dears, if my story touched your heart, I ask you to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell now. Each subscription gives me strength to continue sharing these painful memories. When we tell our stories of overcoming, we create a network of hope that can reach those who need it most. It's like lighting a candle in the darkness. Its light can guide someone who is lost. Leave in the comments the word renewal. Only those who watched until now understand the true power of this word. Do it now. Don't wait even one more minute. Life goes beyond pain. Believe that. I am living proof that it is possible to survive, heal, flourish, and finally help others do the same. This is the true victory over those who tried to destroy us. May God bless each one of you, and may hope never be lacking in your hearts.